Hello everyone, my name is Angeli and today we're going to learn about literacy and language processes, thinking, reading, and writing in first and second languages. Have you always wondered how our mind works when we read or write? How we think is an endlessly fascinating subject and has been an area of enduring interest to educators, psychologists, and other scientists for many, many years. Reading emerged very early as a major focus of psychological theory and research, and today, information, theory, and research all support that linkage and further suggest that the relationship between reading and writing is direct and parallel. That is, they are different parts of the same coin. In this chapter, we will understand the current theory of cognition and cognitive processes. Then we will connect those to reading and writing process theory. Following that, we will explore issues of second language development and literacy. The study of cognitive theory is the study of the information processing of the mind. All processes of thought fall within the realm of cognition. These processes operate by manipulating information that comes into the mind. When the mind receives new information, it does two things: codes it as new information or retrieves it from memory as not new information. For this reason, cognition also means knowing. Current understanding of cognition is centered in schema theory, derived from the work of Sir Frederick Bartlett and Swiss epistemologist Jean Piaget, and somewhat in contrast to Piagetian theory, the work of Lev Vygotsky. Piaget defined schema, whose plural form is schemata, as a cognitive structure by which individuals intellectually adopt to and organize the environment. Schemata receive, sort, classify, and hold information about environmental events and objects. Take John. He learns new things all the time in very natural ways. For example, he has noticed that the leaves on the trees in his backyard change color and fall off in the autumn. Just by looking around, he's learned something new about trees in the fall season. John has learned that the leaves change color in the fall, which helps him understand that when the leaves are bright orange, it's fall. Simply put, a schema is a general idea about something. For example, when John understands that leaves change color in the fall, he has a schema about leaves and fall. Schemata are acquired, extended, and refined as a result of both direct and vicarious experience. When more dynamic types of schemata are considered, they are often described as scripts, which tell us what to expect and how to behave in specific situations. Here is an example of how schema theory plays out. Using your senses, you pick up details and pay attention to physical stimulus around you. Then, you recall information from episodic or semantic memory. After activating the adequate schema, which in this example is a dog, you think of how you respond or behave in that situation. James G. extends the notion of scripts with his conceptions of discourses that accompany schemata. He defines discourse as ways of being in the world, or forms of life which integrate words, acts, values, beliefs, attitudes, and social identities, as well as gestures, glances, body positions, and clothes. A discourse is like an identity kit which comes complete with the appropriate costume and instructions on how to act, talk, and often write so as to take a particular social role that others will recognize. Schemata are extended and refined through the processes of assimilation, which is adding new information to old schema, and accommodation, which is creating new schemata and changing old ones with new information. Let's consider a child seeing the picture of a four-legged animal with pointed ears, a short nose, and a tail. She has been taught that this four-legged animal is called a dog. So next time when she sees another picture of a dog with the previously mentioned features, but of different colors, she still knows that the animal is a dog, referring to her set of schemas about dogs. This is assimilation. Now let us consider that with the previously mentioned schema about dogs, the child sees a picture of a similar animal with pointed ears, a short nose, and a tail. She at once knows that the animal is a dog, only to be taught later that it was a cat. This calls in for accommodation, where she needs to modify her idea about four-legged animals. Now let's learn about the relationship between thinking and reading. Reading is the act of constructing meaning while transacting with text. Just as we use information stored in schemata to understand and interact with the world around us, so do we use this knowledge to make sense of print. Readers don't just get meaning from the author, the page, or anywhere else. Readers literally make meaning from the interaction between prior knowledge and previous experience, what they already know. People have different perceptions and opinions when they read a book. In the Goodreads app, you can see various views and ratings of a certain book. Take Caraval, for example. Personally, I didn't really like the entire plot and most of the characters in this YA fantasy, and it felt very slow-paced for me. When you look at the reviews, however, you can see that some people really loved it, while others are just as disappointed as I was. The book meant different things to each of us as readers. Gray Paulson ended his introductory chapter of The Winter Room with this quote: "If books could have more, give more, be more, show more, they would still need readers who bring to them sound and smell and light and all the rest that can't be in books. The book needs you." The view of reading is constructivist in nature, with its emphasis on the individual as creator rather than receiver of meaning. Reading is the act of constructing meaning while transacting with text. The reader makes meaning through the combination of prior knowledge and previous experience, information available in text, the stance he or she takes in relation to the text, and immediate remembered or anticipated social interaction and communication. Let us now look at the reading process. The reading process becomes effective when prior knowledge and previous experience are involved. The two types of prior knowledge are world knowledge, which is the total amount of information a person has accumulated through day-to-day experience, and text knowledge, which is information accumulated from a reader's experience with print. Hartman makes the important point that prior knowledge is not some static thing that readers bring to reading events and unload before they read. Rather, prior knowledge is constantly changing and creating change throughout reading, so that it influences and is influenced by all of the elements of the reading event. Both world and text knowledge form the reader's base of prior knowledge and previous experience, and thus assist the reader in constructing meaning. In some ways, the writing and reading processes share the same definition, wherein writing is the act of constructing meaning while transacting with text. Prior knowledge and previous experience influence writing even when we write in a relatively new area. Let's go back to the very first report we each copied out of the encyclopedia or the World Book. First of all, we copied those reports because each of us knew so little about the topic that we literally had no words to discuss it. Hence, I think it makes much more sense for students, especially when they're new to writing, to write about things they already know about. As we become more sophisticated researchers and report writers, our wider base of world knowledge and knowledge about text produced increasingly individualistic text, so that now, when we study and write on the same topics as others, we produce widely divergent text. Acquiring literacy in a second language also shows a process which is presented by numerous theories, but most especially with two predominant ones. All theories focus on the learner and his or her home culture as central to the process. That is, that second language acquisition is a process in which individual learning is assisted and shaped by social convention. The first is Krashen's second language acquisition theory. Stephen Krashen posits a model of second language acquisition based on 5 hypotheses. We have the acquisition learning hypothesis, the natural order hypothesis, the monitor hypothesis, the input hypothesis, and the effective filter hypothesis. The first hypothesis is the acquisition learning hypothesis, in which acquisition of a language occurs as a subconscious process as we encounter and use a second language for some communicative purposes. When we travel to another country and stay there for a while, we eventually learn to communicate with native speakers in that country. Before we know it, we've already acquired another language. Krashen considers acquisition rather than learning to be the primary means for second language development. The natural order hypothesis refers to the general order in which elements of a second language are acquired. It means that we acquire the grammatical structures of a second language in a predictable order, even though linguists do not have complete understanding of what that order is for every structure in every language. The monitor hypothesis explains the relationship between acquisition and learning. Although acquisition, encountering and using language for specific communicative purposes, is responsible for fluency in a second language, conscious learning, what we know and can articulate about that language, serves as a monitor or editor in language use. Krashen emphasizes that for the monitor to be effective, the second language user must have time to consult or reflect on language rules, focus on form, or be thinking about correctness and know the rule. The input hypothesis is the heart of Krashen's method. It states that we learn a second language by understanding language containing linguistic structures that are just beyond the structures we already know. The input hypothesis is only concerned with acquisition, not learning. According to this hypothesis, the learner improves and progresses along the natural order when he or she receives second language input that is one step beyond his or her current stage of linguistic competence. Krashen identifies three effective variables that serve as filters or mental blocks that influence second language acquisition. Anxiety, motivation, and self-confidence are the influencing filters. In situations in which we feel comfortable, in which motivation is high for acquiring the language, and in which we see ourselves as capable listeners, acquisition of the second language is enhanced. The opposite occurs when anxiety is high and motivation and self-confidence are low. Krashen summarizes his theory this way. People acquire second languages when they obtain comprehensible input and when their effective filters are low enough to allow the input in. He suggests further that second language acquisition will occur in classes taught in the second language if the student can understand what is going on in the class, that is, when input is comprehensible. Jim Cummins introduced the terms Basic Interpersonal Communication Skills, or BICS, and Cognitive Academic Language Proficiency, or CALP, to distinguish between students' second language fluency and proficiency in social settings and their fluency and proficiency in classrooms. Cummins estimates that ESL students acquire age-appropriate conversational proficiency in about 2 years, whereas academic proficiency requires 5 to 7 years. He cautions us, therefore, to refrain from assuming that second language students' proficiency in conversational English is a true measure of their proficiency in science or social studies or mathematics. This is particularly true in the situation in which we are using English language tests to measure intelligence or academic skills. Cummins makes the further point that even as ESL students are acquiring skill in academic discourse, so too are native English speakers. Thus, ESL learners must catch up with the moving target if they are to match the proficiency of native English speakers. In this chapter, we have viewed reading and writing as parallel literacy processes that are linked with cognition, and we have explored issues of second language development and literacy. What is critical to understand is that teaching in such a way as to increase students' literacy and language abilities does not dilute content instruction. In fact, it increases students' learning content. Because these instructional strategies take into account the diversity of second school students in today's schools and focus on literacy and language development in the service of content learning, they represent at least part of the fundamental change in secondary school teaching as discussed in Chapter 1. Thanks for watching. I hope you've learned a lot from this video presentation. To view Chapters 1 and 3, click the links in the description box below.